Thank you, Roy. We are very honored that all of you are here with us today. Today is an incredibly special as Coresight is partnering with Bloomberg Intelligence on our first mini conference. Coresight Research is almost 2.5 years old, having spun out from Li & Fung in February of 2018. With our background in supply chain, the current environment is proving to be one of the most challenging for those in the Coresight community. There is much opportunity to collaborate and work together to drive results. In order to connect everyone around the world, we have hosted almost 75 virtual events since the current crisis began, including Coresight Classrooms, Open for Business, Coresight Conversations, Tips from the Trade, Legends, and much more. We've had the unique opportunity to provide research and advisory services to our clients who are at the intersection of retail, real estate, and technology. This year, unlike any other, we have been providing answers to questions that have never been asked before, as this environment remains incredibly dynamic. We are able to do this as a result of your support. I want to thank you for joining us today. I wanted to highlight a great new report series at Coresight entitled Reimagine Retail. This is a series of 8 reports with an ebook to publish later this month. We've already written on topics such as gamification, live streaming, group buying, all which drive consumer engagement, and we will be highlighting more in the weeks to come. Coresight believes that there are many opportunities right now to reconnect with the consumer to drive sales and margins, and we aim to keep these technologies and collaborations in front of all of you. I'm excited to be co-hosting today with Poonam Goyal, who is the sector head and senior equity analyst for North American retail at Bloomberg Intelligence. With 15 years of equity research experience, she covers leading specialty retailers and department stores at Bloomberg and is one of the best known retail analysts truly in our community. She started her career following steel and service center companies at Goldman Sachs Investment Research Group and then transitioned over to retail. With that, I very much want to thank Poonam and the Bloomberg Intelligence team for the opportunity to partner on this event, and we'll turn the floor over to her now. Thanks, Poonam.
Thank you, Deborah. We are also very excited to be hosting with you and Coresight. The intersection of retail and technology has definitely kept everyone on their toes, and the rapid acceleration during COVID is going to forever transform the landscape. In our report earlier, we highlighted that digital sales, which today are 11% of total U.S. retail sales, could more than double by 2024, based on our estimates. And we think really even beyond that over time. Mobile was a game changer. It has grown over 340% since 2014, as apps and larger screen sizes have captured consumer attention and sales. The next big accelerator could be social commerce, in our view. A platform that can quadruple to over $84 billion over the same time frame. Video and image-based shopping will change the way that we shop and integrate a more fun and easy shopping experience online. We're already starting to see that on YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, and even Instagram. In fact, video content on a brand's website has the potential to increase conversion rates by 86%. And that medium also attracts younger shoppers, which everyone's targeting right now. More than 50% of millennials and Gen Z shoppers have made a purchase inspired by social media browsing, and they spend more than 3 hours a day on social media platforms. Gen Z spend, for example, 2 to 3 times more money shopping on social channels than the average users. We expect all brands and retailers to follow the social journey. Aerie, Urban Outfitters, Adidas, Puma, Nike, Michael Kors, Estee Lauder are just some of the brands and retailers that are testing both video and image-based commerce and leading the way to this transformation that we expect to see in retail over the coming years. In our coverage, Nike leads the digital effort, and Nike expects that digital sales could be 50% of their total sales by 2023. That's a big leap from mid-teens levels prior to COVID-19. And even from the last quarter, where it was above 30%. We think the revolution will be led by new stores that will be digitally enabled, like Nike Rise in China, which features personal more shopping and community experiences. So before I turn it over to the panelists, we also want to hear from you. So that brings me to our polling question. We will take a few seconds to answer it, and we will share the results at the end of the first panel. With that, I'd like to welcome our speakers for the first panel. Joining us is Helen Aboah, CEO of Urban Zen. Helen oversees the brand's operations, including Urban Zen Collection and artisanal partnerships, Urban Zen retail stores, Urban Zen Center, and the Urban Zen Foundation. She joins us today via video, and she also leads groundbreaking Urban Zen Integrative Therapy, a program that integrates Eastern healing modalities with Western science. Welcome, Helen. Also joining us is Marie Driscoll. Marie is an award-winning retail analyst who joined Deborah at Coresight when it was Fung Global Retail and Tech in 2014. She covers luxury and fashion at Coresight. Welcome, Marie. We're excited to have you as well. And last but not least, Rich Wagner, CEO of Prevedere. He brings 15 years of leadership from the Big Four consulting and Fortune 500 firms. He's worked with C-level executives on major corporate initiatives, including preparing due diligence on dozens of multi-billion-dollar mergers, acquisitions, and corporate projects. So let's get started. I'd like to welcome all three of you and look forward to hearing your insight on a really interesting time in retail. We'll get started with Helen. Helen, you've held multiple lead roles across merchandising, supply chain, and digital. Can you help us better understand how COVID-19 will bring forward a new retail? And then what are some of Urban Zen's strengths that position it to be a part of it? What will change for your brand as you move forward? And will retail ever really go back to the way it was?
So Poonam, what we've witnessed is COVID-19 accelerate the new retail landscape we all knew was coming. So I would first start with that retail, whether in-store or digital, will be even more customer-centric. This pandemic has required retailers to leverage technology to enhance their customer relationships, including ourselves. Therefore, customers have grown accustomed to even more virtual support tools when shopping online or on their phones than they ever have in the past, which at the core are personal and consultative. Consumers won't return to the old way of traditional retail. For example, we're seeing this done successfully by offering virtual appointments with sales specialists or using augmented reality to see what a product looks like in your home or on your body. The future of retail is also providing what a customer wants when they want it and how. So for us luxury brands, we'll need to view digital not only as a content and a communication driver that houses the stories that evoke emotion and maintain our brand positioning, but also as a virtual store front in order to convert more digitally native customers, which is, again, a new area for us. And in terms of the future of retail, moving forward, investing in omnichannel capabilities is imperative. We've seen this depending on the size and scale of businesses. We will see a bigger focus on digital shopping channels, even if that requires stores to also operate as fulfillment hubs. And lastly, I would say the future of retail is definitely experiential. Digital will be augmented by the in-store experience. For example, here at Urban Zen, we have our location in the Hamptons that operates as a retail restaurant experience in partnership with Tuto. We curate wellness experiences in Los Angeles in our store, hold art exhibits, all year long in our New York City store. So for years now, Urban Zen has believed in this concept of retail encompassing more than just product sales, but more about educating the consumer where, how the product's made. And we're offering those digital experiences that include travels that were recorded during the design team's inspirational trips. So that's how we see it moving forward, and that's how we're positioning ourselves.
Transformation across digital, data analysis still very much at the core behind good decision making. So I'd like to bring Rich in here. Rich, tell us what you think the data tells you about the future of retail, shopping, and just consumer behavior. What changes are here to stay? How are retailers and clients leveraging this data in their forecasting and planning process, considering all the uncertainty that we see today?
Hi, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I'm on my phone. Okay. So if you can hear me now, the question was about really acceleration of the transformation of the consumer and the retailer. Is that correct?
That's correct, Rich.
That's correct, Rich.
Oh, good. Okay. So what we've seen is certainly the consumers changing how they're buying. Those that were infrequent purchasers of online or using mobile to shop, there's early studies that show they've adopted that as a new preferred method and will continue to adopt it. On the retailer side of things, we've seen even traditional stores that may serve rural or urban settings, that both consumers are changing the way that they purchase, as well as their in-store experience has changed from a retailer standpoint. So we've seen companies that really adopted omni-channel much faster. Pickup and delivery same day is new. Even drive-throughs in some of the really rural areas. One of the CEOs I heard talk about this was Hal Lawton at Tractor Supply. They're really changing the customer experience, and they're using this as a catalyst to digital transformation, in addition to way that they watch and monitor consumers using new data sets and new data about how they behave.
Great, thank you. So Marie, why don't you jump in here for a second and let's focus on luxury brands, a group that you followed very closely at Coresight. Digital is still very small there. Where do you see that going, and perhaps speak to who is best positioned to make the greatest digital leap as we said here today?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Luxury has been slow to join the digital channel, but COVID showed us how very important digital is. If you are a luxury brand in 2020 and you don't have a digital strategy, you're toast. Young Chinese consumers are pivotal to the continued growth of luxury of the industry, and their mode of brand discovery has been digital. That's where they discover and that's where they interact. And if you're not in that digital ecosystem, you're not discovered, you're not remembered, and you're not part of the consideration set. So COVID, as we mentioned earlier, as Helen mentioned earlier, really just accelerated the adoption of digital. Many luxury brands had already entered the digital phase, and we're seeing that accelerate, and especially with the advent of video shopping. Video is a perfect venue for telling brand stories, and that's what luxury brands do. So luxury shoppers need to be able to access online in a COVID environment. The luxury brands are making some products available. You don't have to have everything available. And the big players like the Christian Dior's, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Hermes are all doing interesting things digitally to engage their consumer and attract new ones. And as video becomes a bigger piece of the digital media marketing mix, we think more luxury brands will adapt it.
Just moving back to Rich really quickly. Obviously, the times are volatile and things are moving much faster than we would have expected. How do you think retailers will be adapting to this volatility in the near term, or even novel data that they're seeing today?
Yeah, the foundation of digital transformation is really data, and there's a wealth of information that's now available that wasn't available before. And what we're seeing retailers do is start to look for things that are more frequent in nature than maybe some of the assumptions and the gut feel that they had in the past on what their consumers were wanting or what their consumers would do. We're seeing things that are being tracked about us and our behaviors that now can be leveraged by leaders within organizations to make more fact-based and data-driven decisions. Some examples of that are about these even smaller retailers that use a system for online scheduling we can leverage that data of about 100,000 employees across retail, food and beverage, and we can actually see what stores are open, how many hours they're working, and other retailers that may be essential can leverage that information to understand, are they organically growing their customer base, or is it because some of the other retailers or competitors are not open, or maybe they're not staffing the stores completely. We've also seen more near-term signals on what we call soft data or consumer sentiment, consumer spending plans. That data we can track by category, and we can ask a panel of customers in the next 6 months, how do you feel about purchasing certain categories? And watch as that's shifting quite a bit away from some of the luxury goods and the apparel, of course, the more basic needs, but also things like lawn and garden. As people are staying at home, we can actually ask them questions about their purchases there. And then some really interesting stuff that's happened and that our customers are leveraging are things like mobile data and point of interest data that now even the Federal Reserve is starting to collect from Google and Apple and other providers of this data that can actually tell us where people are going, how long they're spending in locations, whether they're actually walking up to the counter or they're going through a drive-through. And those metrics combined with those traditional hard metrics in a more frequent basis are being leveraged to really understand how to react in this environment.
Point of making your decisions. We know experiences matter, and we know digital is going to drive retail. What about stores? Helen, let's have you jump back in here to give us a quick rundown of your stores and what really makes them different. Store sizes are getting smaller in retail, but Urban Zen has pretty large store formats. So how do these stores fit into the future of retail? I guess from every standpoint, experiential, product, and even sustainability to a large extent.
Absolutely. So for each urban store location has its own culture, where whether it's, you look at Los Angeles, it's the epicenter of wellness. At its core, Urban Zen is about finding calm in the chaos, nurturing the mind, body, and soul, whether you're buying yoga apparel, loungewear. So we embrace the culture of Los Angeles. For New York, we celebrate the arts through holding exhibits from all over the world. And Sag Harbor Tuto is a very neighborhood, family environment. The restaurant retail concept is very successful for us there. It's the Urban Zen furniture and home decor decorate the space. So again, it's about embracing the city that we're in and making sure that every location is experiential, including our digital space. In addition to our own products, our stores introduce artisanal products from Bali, Guatemala, Africa, South America, and local artisans, by the way, from the city, the communities we're in. And our vision and support on sustainability is experienced in our collective conscious design and collaboration with global artisans. That's really important to us.
How, sustainability will be luxury brands, how important it is. I believe you authored a report on luxury rebranding in the U.S. Tell us a little about this. What will drive a luxury recovery either this year or in the next year or two?
On the luxury shopper in the U.S. Luxury is really a global industry, and it is a lot of its growth comes, number one, out of China, and the vast demographic trends of people entering the middle and upper classes, then that's been driving luxury growth for the last 20 years and will continue to do so for probably the next 20. Another thing that drives luxury growth is international travel. And that for this year is down and out for the count. So that's going to impact luxury spending this year. And we probably won't see luxury hit the numbers that it hit at the end of 2019 until the end of 2021. You're seeing the Chinese consumer back in. If you listen to the LVMH call yesterday, China is already back. They're very positive about a recovery in the United States. And it's going to take time because the consumer is still nervous about going to the stores, but strong brands will recover. They have heritage elements, and during times of unease, heritage brands that you can count on, luxury consumers flock to. But one of the silver linings that we have here with the lack of travel, on the survey that we did in mid-June, we found that 30% of luxury spending for U.S. luxury shoppers is done on international travel. So that 30% of their luxury wallet, they can keep here in the United States and spend domestically on luxury product. So we think that, smart luxury brands that engage their customer, have exclusives, practice clienteling, either analog with a phone, in store with appointments, or with Zoom appointments, they will capture increased spend. Another silver lining of COVID has been the pendulum swinging from a consumer focused on experiences to a consumer focused on product. Frankly, with COVID, we've had a lack of experiences. You can't go out to eat, you can't go to the theater, you can't go to the art galleries. So there's limited experiences, and shopping becomes the new experience. And nothing creates an experience like a Nike or a luxury product. So we see that driving luxury rebounding later this year and through 2021.
Great, thanks, Marie. I'm going to turn it back to Rich, bigger picture question. Rich, what do you feel about the role of technology through chaos black swan events?
Yeah, the role of technology to me is always been an enabler to really improve results, or a change agent, if you would, to improve results. And nobody can predict the black swan event. So you really can't predict what you can't predict. We're not going to predict a hurricane, exact day that it's going to happen. We're not going to predict a global pandemic that hasn't happened for 100 years. However, when those events happen, the companies that actually adopt and accelerate the use of technology are typically the ones that are going to survive and even thrive, and use it as a catalyst again to really outperform the competition. So I think technology is here to, one, be that guiding light, and to bring some facts and some data and insights into our decision making that now is, really mission critical almost daily, and it's definitely weekly in retail to pay attention to. So we have to get away from that ad hoc and manual way of maybe assuming things will happen and collecting data by hand on consumers, but actually embrace technology to tell us, which direction to take during an event like this. Also, for where are there signs of recovery that we can actually start to feel comfortable. And if we leverage technology, take the guesswork out of it, take the assumptions out of it again, I think those are the companies that will survive. And although we couldn't predict the black swan event, we can definitely help companies adapt to it and change their business process to succeed.
So I guess, as we've heard a lot about the new retail, but I guess I wanted to ask you one last question before we go into our poll question. It's that, what is the most interesting thing that you have seen during COVID that you think will really redefine retail for the future? Why don't we start with Helen and then move to Marie and then Rich?
It's definitely the digital capabilities that didn't exist a few years ago, right? So for us, whether it's the use of augmented reality and that product being perfected enough for us to feel comfortable using it and authentic, and then the other is a virtual reality. This, again, giving our customer the same personal one-on-one experience that he or she are used to in our store, and bringing it to their home, or whether it's, in their home, or we're doing that vice versa from our own space. Again, I think that it's embracing the technology and watching as the industry has done that, and being very creative and utilizing it as an instrumental tool moving forward.
How about you, Marie?
So for me, it's the consumer and how the consumer reacted in COVID. It's very unusual that you would ever see consumer behavior change as dramatically as we saw it change in COVID, due to the fear regarding people's health, what happened with their employment, all of a sudden switching from walking around, eating out, to only thinking about essentials, antiseptics, toilet paper. Obviously, we're past that, but what behaviors stay and what change? And I think that during this time of quarantine, the consumer has had the time to do self-examination, examine their values, and I think they're re-examining their needs and enjoying the power of their pocketbook. When they spend, what that says. And I think they're looking for brands that represent their values. And so I think that's really exciting for me.
Agreed. And Rich?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me is how leaders and some of the top retailers that we work with have changed their behavior. What we're seeing now is really a lot more communication at the leadership team, a lot more frequently. So instead of the monthly, quarterly, annual plan, we're seeing leaders within companies 2 to 3 times a week and maybe even daily actually get together and review facts and data about what's happening. And they're using that information to truly fuel a consensus-based forecasting approach on big decisions, like how many lawn tractors should we stock? We saw one retailer that in their history they had never sold bicycles, but they noticed, one of the employees noticed a shortage or an outage of it at another store, and they used that information and immediately went out and changed and brought in bicycles to their stores and sold out.
A co-moderator has joined the conference.
So it's been a interesting thing to see people, go from very lengthy time frames and very thought out and thoughtful ways to make decisions to react more quickly, but to do it in a more conscientious way, in really a more fact-based way that I think was really needed. I think you see some of the retailers that aren't making it or aren't going to make it, their business models haven't changed for decades. But there's a group of leaders within some of the leading brick and mortar retailers that we work with that are adopting technology and are adopting change, but the speed at which they're doing it is really compressed. It's not a 2 to 3 year digital transformation exercise. They're saying, hey, I need external data right now. So that's really something that I've seen is just an acceleration of change and the ability for leaders to truly take advantage of it in the shortest time frame I've ever seen.
Great, thank you. Before I end this panel, let's go over to the poll question and let's see. Looks like a pretty clear win here. So how important do you think an omni-channel retail strategy will be to the success of retailers as we ease into recovery mode? And it seems like we have a 90% vote on extremely. Panelists, do you all agree? I mean, I would definitely agree. How about you, Marie, and then Helen and Rich?
100%.
Absolutely.
Helen, you're nodding.
Definitely agree.
Everyone. Great. So I'd like to, with that, thank Marie, Helen, and Rich for joining us today on this panel. Thank you for sharing your insights. We're really glad you were able to join. And I'd like to turn the platform over to Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research, to talk a little bit about the future of real estate.
Thank you, Poonam. That was a great conversation. Welcome to the Future of Real Estate panel, where we have 3 distinguished speakers. As the retail real estate sector has been very much in flux, many companies are rethinking the future of their physical footprint, and some have exited the physical world altogether. I'm excited to welcome James Cook, Lindsay Dutch, and John Crombie for what I am sure will prove to be a dynamic discussion as we discuss what's next in the real estate sector and how retailers and landlords can work together to establish a strong landscape for the future. James Cook is the America's Director of Retail Research at JLL, based out of Indianapolis. He oversees the production of national retail research and also serves as the voice of retail research in the region. His focus includes the development and implementation of research strategy, methodology, platform deliverables, and broad sector analyses for the retail property markets in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. I've known James for many years through our involvement in NARG through ICSC, and he hosts a great podcast, Where We Buy, covering retail and real estate, and I would encourage all of you to listen. Lindsay Dutch is a REITs equity research analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. During her 13-year tenure at Bloomberg, she has covered a number of sectors And for the last 6 years, she has focused on retail real estate. We look forward to her analysis of the sector as we move forward today. Lastly, John Crombie, as an Executive Managing Director, Retail Services Canada, Cushman and Wakefield. In his role, John is dedicated to implementing a multifaceted strategy to grow the Canadian retail platform. This includes strengthening the retail tenant representation and agency leasing service lines. John and I have had many in-depth discussions on the global real estate landscape, and he always highlights a new way to consider an established sector. We have also spent much time together with James on the NARG through ICSC. So let's kick it off with the first question to John. How do you see the relationships between landlords and retailers evolving in Canada? And is there a model of success that the rest of the world can follow?
In terms of what how the retail and the landlord will react together, you mean, or what? Sorry, I missed the question. Deborah?
And kind of, is there any type of model we've seen for success thus far?
Well, I can tell in terms of the brokerage model, maybe that's where you're going to in terms of what's happening from a brokerage side right now. Certainly after COVID hit, we are in a situation where we had to increase our communication with our clients. It was important that we had up-to-minute involvement with our clients to give them sort of insight and sharing knowledge of what was happening with the changing market conditions. In the early COVID, it was more about goodwill than certainly was making commissions. And we as a company adopted more of an advisory role, especially when we talked about things like rent relief or lease modifications. We helped many clients develop some new strategies on how to take advantage of the marketplace as it was changing, especially if those particular services that were open. Supply chain was a big component of what was happening with a lot of retailers and how to help with that supply chain. Second is appraisal services and opinion of values. Many were looking at the real estate and maybe had to do some refinancing. And Cushman, we had a lot of that refinancing in place. Now in sort of a post-COVID world, we're actually seeing a little more activity with some retailers looking at the marketplace. And so, for example, surprisingly enough, we were seeing some fitness companies out there looking at opportunities, a number of QSRs, grocery, obviously, who've been very active, continue to expand. In Canada, we're also seeing some of our latest deals have been cannabis deals. As you know, and it's legal across Canada. And then I think with the value change, we're also seeing some companies like Habitat for Humanity. A lot of people will be looking at that type of opportunities going forward. We believe the relationship from a brokerage have for the landlord or a tenant is a partnership arrangement. We also know there's going to be a huge synergy between the investment side of our business as well as our leasing. Leasing is changing dramatically. Unfortunately, rents are dropping, retailers are closing. And so when you're looking at opportunities to go forward, it's really from the investment side, we have to look at that more closely. I sense there's going to be a lot of M&A activity, mergers and acquisition activity. A lot of American companies, for example, looking at Canadian real estate, opportunities there for consulting or sale leasebacks. We also believe that retailers are going to look more about the quality of sites, not the quantity of sites. And so I think you need to focus enhancement on flagship property listings and opportunities there, because when they do come up, retailers will be quite interested in extending on that. Finally, I think we need to look forward going forward is that as the market's changing, especially in dropping rents, and retailers need to look at balancing their sales with their rent, is trying to do some blend and extends. So that's taking your current lease and going to the landlord earlier and talking about opportunities to think about extending that lease out, which is great from the landlord's perspective. And in the other side is reducing some of the rents for the retailer, again, making it a lot better to survive, especially as sales have gone down. And I guess the last point is with tenant considerations today, you have to look at different soft considerations. And so we're going forward with our retailers to say, why don't we push for more options or capping additional rents? We're looking at better signage or client parking or adding drive-throughs, which is now becoming more important than ever before. So these are some of the things that we need to look at our business differently and how retailers and landlords are going to act. Because right now, there's certainly a lot of tension between the landlords and tenants these days. A lot of it just from circumstance of the fallout from COVID and the impact that it's had on retail sales.
Thanks, JoAnn. You bring up this idea of grocery and food and beverage, areas that James is truly an expert. James, can you help us better understand not only what you've seen in this environment, but also your expectations for the future?
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up food and beverage, because I'm sitting here, it's getting to be lunchtime, and I'm sitting here thinking, all right, I'm in a relatively walkable spot right now. And I'm like looking at my phone and I'm like, okay, I can walk and pick up from Chipotle, pick up from Panera. And then there's all these sit down restaurants I either can't go to or wouldn't feel comfortable going to. It's now a transition where everything, all the fun experience out of retail and food and beverage has been completely sucked out. And I think I've heard some other folks mention it today, that we're just in this pure commoditization of retail, back to what it used to be in the olden days. And for food and beverage, what that means is it's a bad scene for a while, because you've got to have restaurants at capacity and you've got to be able to sell alcohol in order to make enough money to pay your rent. So there's going to be a lot of restaurants in the short term that are going to go out of business. Now, in the long term, if we talk about maybe sometime into next year, when we've got a widely available vaccine, I think it's going to be blockbuster for those left standing. I know myself, I'll be going out to a different restaurant every night. Everybody will be, it's just, and I think that goes for all experiential retail, because right now the new experience is just safety. Like, the only experience I want is to know you're not going to breathe on me in my personal space. You've got a mask, I've got a mask. I come in, just head down, get my stuff and leave. When that goes away, oh man, it's going to be awesome. So we just have to, the smaller businesses who don't have the money in the bank or can't tap the funds to make it through, unfortunately, they're going to be the ones that are in trouble. And the folks that can stick around long enough to reap the benefits of the other side are going to be really the winners in all of this.
Well, speaking of retailers and restaurants in trouble, Lindsay, can you talk about what's happening with landlords investing in tenants? And is this, mostly an occupancy play, or how do you think about it?
Sure, and I would say that I do agree with what James said about kind of the survival of the fittest. I think that's going to apply to the landlords as well. And those that really own the highest quality properties that are well located, if they can get through this very tough time, there will be a resurgence in people wanting to visit those properties to shop. They'll want the experiences back. So it's really getting through this tough period. And we've seen some interesting announcements with some bigger mall landlords, such as Simon Property Group and Brookfield, who have taken an interest in buying into some retailers. They've done this before, but obviously with some retailer disruption that has accelerated with the pandemic, there are more opportunities out there, and they seem to be quite aggressive in the ones that they're considering. I mean, there's talk of Brooks Brothers, there's talk of JCPenney, and also Ascena, which was recently announced Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So I think there could be a little bit of a blurring of the lines there, and I do think that they are thinking about occupancy. There's a lot of vacancies that could come out of the pandemic, and landlords need to protect their portfolios for as long as they can. So even if they can help some of their tenants stay solvent for a short period of time, help them come up with proper merchandising mix for the overall property, it will help with those occupancy levels and just sort of keeping those properties look a little bit fuller when there's a lot of pressure on clearance coming.
Lindsay, going back to John's comments at the beginning, which I thought were very interesting in terms of how we might see, some of these malls re-tenanted, what would you say are some of your predictions in terms of who might be some of the new tenants, and kind of how might we experience them all differently in the future?
Yeah, so the big question, I think, prior to the pandemic was, what happens with some of the less valuable retail real estate. There's too much of it in the US, and we need to find other uses for it. I think in some of those properties, we could see a higher transition rate trying to make some of those boxes a warehouse. I saw Washington Prime Group do this more recently. They're working on it with an old Sears box. And when you think about warehouse rent, nationally it averages about $5 to $6 a square foot. But more infill locations near cities could kind of approach sort of anchor rates in an open air environment. So the math is getting closer in terms of working with the rent, but you still have to work with the municipality and get the approval to change the use. And a warehouse use is just less desirable from a township point of view. You have a lot more truck traffic, which is not what people always want. And you're taking away something that was consumer facing and may have been like a shopping experience that aided other tenants that were around, and kind of pulling that away with a warehouse. So there's definitely factors on both sides that really need to be considered. I think in higher quality locations, we are seeing a lot of e-tailers that maybe have more of an online presence. They really want to have some type of physical presence. We could see more of them sort of come into those higher quality locations. And especially since it appears that a lot of the vacancy will be more small shop type boxes, those might be a better fit for someone testing out a new store.
James, do we think about this idea of e-tailers or D2C companies coming to malls? They've done an amazing job of experience online. As we think about them taking that experience offline and what the future of an experiential mall might look like, how do you think that we as consumers might experience it, and where do you think the malls and their tenants work together to create this experience?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about this in the context of Hudson Yards, which we found out Neiman is going to go out of. And Hudson has done a great job pre-COVID with attracting a lot of digital native brands, doing some interesting physical stores there. So the question is, do you take all of that former Neiman space and split it up and do a bunch of new digital native brands? I don't know. I think that might be too much. One of the barriers is that these brands don't have any experience at all finding physical real estate, running physical stores. I know there's some concepts out there like Leap, for example, that offer a turnkey service. So you're a digital native brand and you go to them and they create your store for you and run it for you. So that may be one place where there's a lot of opportunity. I don't think there's enough digital native brands to fill up the amount of vacant department stores that we're looking at over the next year or so. Overall, I think we're going to see a shrinking of the total square footage of retail space in order, But to your question, Deb, the surviving mall is an experiential place where you're going to get and learn about cool new stuff and have fun experiences and have good food and drinks. And there's just not going to be room for commodity retail in the mall of the future. That's what I think. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great point. And John, in light of all that, what's the future of the broker model?
Well, as I say, I was talking about the broker model before in terms of what's happening in the go-forward plan. The other thing we'd actually look at, too, is we believe there's going to be a lot of shadow vacancies. And so there's going to be a lot of space out there that it's still being occupied and the rent is either not being paid or being paid at a very low level. And the landlord doesn't have a lot of options right now in terms of filling that space. So it's going to be important for retailers that are in the ability to expand is to consider some of those shadow vacancies. So we're really keeping a close eye on that as it's going. Another big thing in terms of the rent relief that's happening in the marketplace as well too, and that's obviously been a huge issue going forward. When COVID started, And after the safety of your family and your staff members, everybody's worried about how I'm going to pay rent. And I can tell you from that's changing rapidly. And as many of us know here, that sales are basically directly related to the type of rents you can spend. And so these are declining. I mean, there's predictions they're going to be upwards to 15% declines by year end, as sales may only track 70 to 80% of what our pre-COVID numbers were. And so that's going to have a big effect on a lot of retailers going forward. Collection over the last little while that we've seen is basically less than 30% of rents have been collected for the months of April, May, and June. July is arguably getting better, but depends on the reclosure of a lot of places as well. As mentioned, there's a lot of landlords and tenants that are in a tension position. Some landlords are suing some retailers to get some of that back rent in place. Most of the concessions are based on a rent relief, but to be paid back at a future date. We're also seeing a change in percentage rent scenarios where people are saying, look, to get open, maybe pay some percentage rent. And that from that, you get up and running and we get some rent going. In Canada, we have a government rent relief program, which was interesting, a little awkward at best to try and implement, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. The other things that I've seen is a lot of landlords are looking at the small independent retailers and helping them. They're actually very taking some strong positions on those larger retailers that they believe have strong balance sheets and still in the event should be paying their rent, and they're not paying their rent. And so, but there seems to be an idea that we want to save and help a lot of those small independent retailers. In fact, I believe a lot of them are F&B, as James knows, but they add the flavor to a lot of the retail and to the shopping centers. And so from a perspective to save them, I think it makes a lot of sense. And a lot of them don't have a lot of deep pockets. So there's been a lot of programs in places to look at that as well. So we're seeing that. At the end of the day, the shopping malls have been seeing very low returns on their space, as low as 15%. Open air centers have been better than enclosed center because people obviously feel safer shopping within that area. Back to answering the question from a broker model, we need to adapt to the reality of what's happening in the marketplace and see the changes going on and then help our clients and educate them accordingly.
Great, thank you. And you brought up something I think that was really interesting, is this whole idea of, the revenues generated also by, these malls, these, kind of structural places where we shop, and how important this is to, kind of local, state, and in the US, kind of federal government. Lindsay, in light of that and this kind of idea of just, how important some of these are and represent of certain geographies in terms of, revenue for cities, how do you think about the public-private partnership potentials? How do you see this kind of working its way out? And what do you see as this, kind of collaboration potentially between, landlords and local governments?
Yeah, so the landlords have to work closely with their local government. I mean, they're each important to each other because the government is laying out all the rules on openings, which is critical for these landlords. And then the landlords are paying the taxes, which is critical for the area. So they definitely have to work together. I think that the landlords are doing the very best that they can to help tenants that really need it to survive this period. So thinking about those small tenants that John just referenced that really need the help, and they're kind of critical to creating that experiential and community feel in a center. The landlord, will likely take the risk and negotiate, allow them to either defer or abate some rent. Some of the bigger national tenants, it's a little bit of a harder negotiation, I think, because again, the landlord and the tenant are very important to each other, but each has access to capital if you're a publicly traded company, and I think it has become much more of a push and pull. As it was kind of mentioned earlier, Simon is suing Gap over lost rent. So there's a lot of relationships that are sort of working together, but they're also each trying to make sure that they're covered in the best way possible to survive and come out of this the best that they can. And I think that going back to the transition to warehouse, I think that relationship with the government and the importance of the taxes that are being paid that switch to warehouse, changes that dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, right, we have a lot of C and D malls. I mean, what would be your prediction in terms of the conversion rate to, kind of, if you will, industrial? And how do you think that, kind of just changes the overall opportunities for some of these malls? And are they, kind of half retail, half industrial? How do you see it kind of playing out?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question to answer because even before COVID, retail was already oversupplied. And, the go-to fix for it was mixed use or densification, where you kind of bring in another use, more like office, hotel, or residential. I even thought at the time that that would be very difficult for C and D malls because you're already not as well located. So it's a more difficult problem to solve in those locations versus sort of an A or a B mall where densification might work very well. And I think the warehouse idea is similar. All the retailers are trying to solve this last mile problem. It's the most expensive aspect, right? Delivering that product to the consumer. And there hasn't been a really good solution for it. And I don't think that, I think as James mentioned earlier, that every single vacant department store will become a warehouse. And that's just not really practical. I mean, I think there's isolated incidents that it will work out. And, it will work from a municipality point of view, and it will work from a rent point of view. Anchor mall tenants pay a very low rent, so the math there is a little bit easier, but you still have to transition the box, you have to get the truck access. It's a lot more difficult that once you get through all of the little details sort of about it. The other thing that, some tenants are doing more in the open air space, especially grocers, is trying this idea of micro fulfillment, which relies a lot more on robotics. And they're basically carving out a 10 to 12,000 square foot area in a larger store that they already have. And they're trying to automate, delivery out of that section of the store. Now, it sounds like it really works for stable items that don't change throughout the year. So think like diapers for young families, stuff like that, that's not going to be seasonal at all. So it doesn't seem like it will work for the broad universe. Especially someone like an apparel retailer who's already struggling the most. It may not be the solution there, but we're seeing it more for grocers, Walmart, Target. Landlords are also really trying to help tenants, especially those smaller ones that it may be more difficult to do on their own. The curbside pickup, allocating spaces in the parking lots, trying to make it just a little bit more accessible for the retailers. And to get their product out to the consumer during this difficult time. It's kind of unclear whether curbside will really be sort of a long-lasting trend or if it's just really here as a Band-Aid during the pandemic as people remain uncomfortable to go in the store. I mean, I'm sure that the retailers would much rather you come in and get those additional sales from walking through the store. But like I said, everyone's kind of trying as many options as they can to sort of bring that online or contactless sale to the consumer.
I mean, Lindsay, you bring up a lot of great points. So number one, if we think about the future of the anchors, could they potentially end up being almost like a mini mall into themselves if the consumer is less comfortable kind of walking through an enclosed mall? Number two, this idea of, right, there isn't truly like an Instacart or, right, I can't push a button and have everything, kind of easily be available to the customer for delivery, and how a platform like that might be available to the more non-essential retailers. And then lastly, this idea around micro-fulfillment, the great thing about that, right, it goes back to James' point, is that creates, that really is experiential retail, right? I mean, when you get to watch that, there is a certain level of excitement. So I think you bring up some really good points. James, can you host this weekly podcast and you talk to many interesting individuals. What are the themes that you're seeing that are being teased out from that? And, what's been one of the biggest surprises to you?
Oh man. Well, the first theme is everybody's making it up as they go. I talked to a lot of different people, from CEOs to analysts, and everybody's just, well, not only is everybody stuck at home with their family, and so you get a lot of kids and pets in the background now on these interviews. But people are just figuring it out. The thing that surprised me most, I did an interview a few weeks ago with Jasmine Glasheen, who's sort of a generational retail expert, and she was talking me through the Gen Z perspective on retail right now. And I'd say go ahead and give it a listen. It's one of the best podcasts we've done. But it explains why Gen Z has the lowest percentage of mask use, the lowest percentage of social distancing, and just the thought process, the idea that this is a generation who's missing out on fun. They're missing out on college or high school graduations. They have to be at home with their boring parents. It's just it's a tough time, and they're the future. So it's going to be interesting to see how that translates into retail behavior. So that for me was pretty interesting.
Well, James, you bring up this idea, right, of generations. And I think going back to Lindsay's prior point, one of the things that's been the most interesting, right, is if you look at the data, those who from a year-over-year percentage or even month-over-month, they have those, kind of male and female over 55 have seen the greatest increase, right, in online sales. And so I think that, if the technology is easily accessible, if there's help when you need it, if there's a, kind of online chat, we are seeing, right, people really change their habits very quickly. How do you think this changes the future of shopping?
I mean, certainly we've got the highest percentage of online shopping that we've ever seen, and it's a lot more advanced than we would have expected. But at the same time, at least anecdotally, what I'm hearing is that it's a begrudging form of online shopping, where especially we're talking about boomers and seniors who are doing it because they're afraid of getting sick. And, I talk to people who say, boy, as soon as I can, I'm going back to the produce section so I can pick out my own avocados. So I think that we're certainly going to see a higher online penetration, say 3 years down the road, than we saw last year pre-COVID. But it's not going to be 50%. It's going to be some new, higher yet realistic percentage.
Not only were the retailers, but I think the landlords were also surprised at the strength in traffic. So it truly illustrates, right, to all of us on the call that there is a lot of interest in physical retail. We just need to, we don't want our experience to necessarily be the one of, being safe. We want it to be one of being fun and being with those who kind of make that an enjoyable experience. John, you said some really interesting things when we were preparing for this call around consumer behavior. And one of the lines you said is, right, everyone in the world is going through the same thing at the same time. Can you talk about some of the trends you've noticed, and, what are trends that are kind of here to stay, and what are the ones that you think are just here for a, hopefully short time period?
Yeah. Well, certainly from consumer behavior, I think there's sort of four main areas. There's the ultimate cocooning we talked about, this whole focus on health and well-being, the urban exodus, and then finding the death of fast fashion.
Yeah.
So back to cocooning, like that, our house is now our castle, right? And as we've all been spending months and months at home, we've noticed the spooky doors and the walls need painting, and hence why Lowe's and Home Depot have done very well.
Yeah.
And the idea of we're also cooking more at home, so cookware has gone up as well. So you're seeing this whole idea of the house is our castle. We want to spend more time at home. We want to probably entertain more at home. So I think that's going to be a big change. And that's obviously going to impact home improvement well, home wares well, home technology. We take our 40-inch TV and now it has to be an 80-inch, right? Because we're watching more Netflix than ever before. But it's obviously going to be bad for travel and leisure and recreational products. The second thing, back to healthy living, it's like wearing a seatbelt. There's no question that, never before has personal hygiene is put into sharper focus. And I think this is going to have, again, impact on personal care, Fitness companies, I think, will benefit from it as well. And then health foods, and probably the downside will be tobacco and convenience stores, and hopefully we'll be buying less chips and fast foods. And the urban exodus, as fourth, third, I should say, is the fact that why are we living in the big city in the first place? We're seeing in Canada a big movement of home sales outside of the core into the suburban market, and even going out into rural areas. I mean, I'm sitting in what's the cottage country now, 3 hours from Toronto. And so the question is, why do I even need to be in the big city? So you're seeing that huge shift. And then finally, the death of fast fashion is nothing new, as we know. It's been going on for many years after they sort of populated many of the malls with far too many stores. But now comfort takes precedence. And we're all about this staycation and quiet nights in. And so I think that's just eventual to kill that. And so sportswear and leisure wear is becoming great. I think it'll have obviously a detriment on luxury brands and probably just over general retail. And as it relates to trends, and maybe I'll circle back to what Lindsay said, because the shorter term trends is obviously in the malls, we're going to see an uptick in vacancy. We're going to see this whole safer environment created to encourage shoppers there. Curbside pickup, I think we'll see actually more not individual store, but centers creating curbside pickups for multiple retailers. And I think it will, there's only so much you can do to have that. So I think there's a cap to it. And then I do believe that experiential retail will be on pause. It's not going away, but right now we're not as a group going to go out to an escape room in the dark and start feeling around for each other. So I think you're going to see that kind of just pause for a little while. And it's going to be more about value purchasing and the back to the basics. And over the long term, we're definitely going to see a huge acceleration of redevelopment plans. So all these malls, if they've been thinking about it, they're going to really accelerate it now. And they're going to add that residential component. They're going to add office component. They're going to add senior housing potentially. I think there's going to be a huge right sizing of retailers. Deborah, you're big on this. I think prop tech and shopping centers, with the efficiency, because if rents are going down and gross rent, how do you bring that down? That's through technology. And we need to see more of that employed the next little while. And again, safer for the consumer. And finally, I think there's going to be a huge push to local retail. We see that time and time again. RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, just announced a big plan across the country to support local retailers in with grants and with advice. And I think people, because back to the consumer behavior, we're more and more worried about our local retailers as much as we are for the shopping centers. And we want to make sure they survive, because if they survive, our communities survive. And that's going to be a huge driver. And the last point, maybe, I think landlords are going to have to look at less traditional retailers for their malls. I agree. There's probably some part of it is conversion to fulfillment centers and industrial space where it economically makes sense. But I think you're going to see dog parks. There was one, this Bark Social, that's just come out lately. 25,000 square feet that fits in the parking lot, and they set up a place to have coffee, drink. And I think you'll see more of that, or drive-in movies. Walmart just announced that for their centers, right? And you're seeing, it may be a shorter term, but as a landlord, you've got to look at these alternative uses. The final one is storage. We see a huge push on taking the densification and intensification of shopping centers and adding a storage component. If we're downsizing, where do we put it? We don't want to get rid of it because our kids may use some of that furniture or that stuff later. So we're seeing these storage facilities being built on shopping centers, which are safer to go to and more convenient to go to. So I think this is going to be some of the changes we'll see in our shopping centers over the longer term.
The storage component aspect is incredibly interesting. And you brought up two other points that, our theme at Coresight at the beginning of the year had been around sustainability and this idea of, kind of the death of fast fashion, but also prop tech. There's many areas there that really do have a sustainability angle. Lindsay, earlier in 2020, as we were talking to many publicly traded companies, they were saying that, analysts and investors were asking about their kind of sustainability platform or their sustainability kind of, whether it was ESG or CSR, kind of what were they doing? How are you seeing the publicly traded companies, kind of integrate sustainability, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so a lot of the landlords are working on more sustainable type options. Adding solar on top of the buildings is one of the easier natural transitions. Some of them are issuing green bonds as a way to be a little bit more green as well. And then there's, I think, a lot of littler things that they can do, and being tenant conscious, maybe putting in more tenants that do rentals, which kind of connect with the social and environmentally friendly shopper. So there's a number of ways that they can improve, and I would say they're all working to do those types of things. But I would say solar is probably the most popular.
Great. So with that, I'm going to use our last 120 seconds and ask each of you for a 2021 prediction. James, we're going to put you in the hot seat first.
All right, 2021 is the year where we're gonna party like it's 1999 all over again. When this vaccine is widely available, it's gonna be crazy. We're gonna be having a good time.
I can't wait for that. Lindsay?
Not to be the negative one, but I would say, vacancy will be higher than it is this year. I think that's going to be a lingering challenge that's going to last well into next year, that the landlords on the retail side are really going to have to battle, and like was said earlier, really become creative in filling some of that empty space.
Okay. John, take us home.
Wow. Well, I think I agree with Lindsay. It's going to be a tough year. I mean, the retailers have drained their capital reserves, and what that means is that the chance of doing expansion space or new sites is going to be really challenged for the next while. I think it's a time for retailers to make sure they're getting in the game. They're culling out their underperformer stores. They're sharpening their tools. They're looking at AI to help create smarter stores. They look at their supply chain. Instead of having 3 countries to supply from, they're going to get 10 countries to supply from. And I think the ones that come out of here are going to come out stronger and better than ever before. And so I think that's the opportunity that retailers have. And from a landlord's perspective, is just understanding these changes and adapting as much as the retailers are to these changes, because it's critical for the long-term success.
James, John, Lindsay, thanks for this amazing conversation. And John, you teed us up for our next panel on the future of supply chain. Thank you so much, everyone.
Welcome.
All right, that was a very stimulating conversation with definitely some topics I hadn't considered before, especially some of John's comments around, kind of what we're seeing from a consumer behavior perspective, and then Lindsay talking about, kind of what the future of the malls might look like. And I very much appreciated James's comments around kind of, he's a real expert on experiential retail, but this idea that our experience right now is truly one of safety. So I want to thank James, John, and Lindsay. And with that, we'll move over into the future of supply chain. As we know, during crisis of any kind, the strength of a company's supply chain is really a point of differentiation. And that's no different today for retailers and brands, as we are now in the back half of the year. And many of the conversations are focusing on supply chain for the holiday season and also for spring of 21. Many have been willing to adopt and adapt during this time. And we at Coresight have had conversations with many of you on supply chain technology. We have 4 distinguished speakers who will talk to us more at length today about this topic. And I would like to start by introducing JoAnn Martin, who is the VP of Retail Industry Strategy at Yonder. She has extensive strategic retail experience and a proven track record across apparel, footwear, and accessories, including L Brands, DSW, and Luxottica. In her role at Yonder, she is the industry thought leader truly for retail. Sue Welch is the CEO of Bamboo Rose. She's a successful entrepreneur in retail and technology with 5 companies to her name. She's a thought leader in all aspects of retail technology on a global basis, and is always a few steps ahead of us, I have to admit. With the Bamboo Rose multi-enterprise product and supply chain platform, there is now a seamless approach for retailers and supply chain partners to collaborate and communicate seamlessly, which is more important right now than ever. Whitney Cathcart is co-founder and chief strategy officer at 3D Look. She brings more than 2 decades of working in executive leadership potential and positions from some of America's leading branded and private label manufacturers, with an acute focus on the future of retail. With broad experience in manufacturing and retail, she is an expert on the design, product development, production, distribution, and sales processes. 3D Look is a computer vision, deep learning, and 3D technology company that's focusing on personalization in retail and digital fit customization. Lastly, I'd like to welcome Anurag Rana, who is the sector head and senior tech analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence for software and IT services. He has been in this role for nearly a decade, covering large cap stocks, including Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, Salesforce, and IBM. I would like to welcome all of you here today and thank you, as this is a very extensive topic, and appreciate having time to talk with you today. So Sue, I'm going to kick it off with you. Can you talk about, generally and as specifically as you want to get into, what's been the impact for retail supply chains, and what actions are retailers taking to manage this during this environment? And obviously everything is changing on a daily basis. So how are you advising your clients and potential clients to think about the future of supply chain?
Okay, so first of all, we talk a lot about community. So it's not enough, if you look at, there was a recent report that McKinsey did where 85% of these companies were really caught just off guard. They didn't have the digital technology to really support their supply chain. And so it's one thing to go out and say, I'm going to go and get technology, but if you don't do it relative to your entire community, you lose a lot of ground. So one of the things we focus on is bringing an entire community on, not just a retailer and the supplier, but their inspection companies, their banks, their freight forwarders, their mills, their component suppliers, just everybody they do business with to bring product to market. And that's probably one of the biggest changes that we're seeing, the receptiveness to that message, that I need to have my platform with me because I can only move as fast as my slowest partner. And so if I've got my platform and I've got all my partners and all of my companies that I work with on that platform, we now know everything simultaneous, which means there's no digging out information, trying to disseminate it, and then trying to forward it. In other words, everybody knows what is happening. And when you start to apply AI and machine learning to all of these transactions that are occurring on the platform, you really get those economies of scale. You get to move faster. Everybody starts to drive down cost. And one of the things we've seen, it was interesting when we were working with Home Depot, one of the things they saw when they started to work digitally with their suppliers, that they drove down cost 85% their side relative to samples. They were much more efficient. They got orders out faster, but their suppliers gained a lot of benefit and their costs went down. Now, some of those suppliers said, we've saved so much money, 40% of what we expected just on the administrative side. We're going to turn some of those dollars back to your Home Depot as marketing dollars. So the ability for the retail community and all of their partners to start to get on a platform that says, this is around the functionality for bringing product and supply chain and control. And now we're all on that same platform. We're seeing a big rush to that. And we're seeing people really move much more faster than they had in the past relative to getting their partners on the platform with them and to start dealing with them digitally.
Thank you, Sue. And Whitney, that really tees up my next question to you. As we're seeing retailers and brands look towards digitization of their supply chain, how does 3D Look step in and assist? And what are you seeing in terms of the interest to truly digitize?
Yeah, so if you really think about it, the first part of a digital supply chain all starts with body data. And so in order to create better fitting clothing, you need to understand what consumers actually look like. So when we think about kind of what does the future of supply chain look like, and we look across kind of that ecosystem, we're really thinking about 3D Look comes in at the very beginning. And so essentially, we function as the conduit between the consumer, the brand, and the factory. Our mission is to enable the apparel industry essentially to make better fitting clothing for consumers. And we do that through a simple exchange of body data. So when you think about the future and personalization requires a ton of data. It requires smaller production runs. It requires shortening development timelines. It requires new factory models based on small production runs versus, a line of making one garment, in mass. And so understanding that there's lots of different things that need to happen across that supply chain, but it really begins with understanding everything you can about the consumer. And creating better experiences for her means not just understanding, who she is and where she lives and the behavioral side of it, but it also really means understanding the physical side of it too. And that's really where 3D Look plays in.
Oh, that's an incredibly important point. And actually, JoAnn and I have spoken a lot about this idea of demand forecasting. So if we're not buying one, how many should we be buying and what markets? And, this I think is what caught retailers off guard quite significantly at the, and depending on, essential or non-essential, where, what categories you were selling. JoAnn, how have you seen, right, as, supply chain strategies are rapidly changing and they've had to evolve? What do you see as the future of demand forecasting and what have people learned, kind of so far this year?
Sure. I think the future of demand forecasting has been the nucleus of everything that we've seen going on through COVID. And one of the challenges that we are most definitely seeing is that retailers have struggles with how to predict their future based off of all of the things going on around them. So it's been challenging for them. So what they've had to do is they've had to manage figuring out how to predict it and where to go from that. So that's been a challenge. So I think that what we've seen is that the most responsive demand forecast that we have, AI and ML, are the way that retailers need to be responding to be able to react versus historical forecasts and being able to take into account all of that.
So Anurag, as we look at, first we understand, fit, then we place our orders. What's happening in terms of delivery networks?
Thanks. So one of the things that we have seen is a massive acceleration in the, companies going from brick and mortar to online, which is not a surprise for anybody. But one of the things people don't talk about is how do you actually fulfill those orders? So, just to give you a quick example, if you have to match Amazon's delivery network, you really need to invest a lot more into it. We recently placed an order on Costco online, and frankly, I'm still waiting for it after a couple of weeks. You really can't have that kind of a bottleneck in the system and then expect to take market share away from Amazon, or forget market share, even the ability to compete in that same area. So all the retailers that are running to go online, which actually it's not that hard because we follow a company called Shopify. It'll help you get online in a few days. But in order for you to solve logistics in the back end, I think that's where we will see the biggest bottlenecks, going forward, and that's where the bulk of the investments needs to go.
That's very helpful. And Sue, you've talked about, I thought this was very insightful. You can only move as fast as your slowest partner. Can you help us understand through, kind of multi-enterprise platforms, how there's really the visibility, and also how does communication change between, the retailer and the supplier?
Okay, so it no longer is focused on just the retailer and the supplier. And the way a multi-enterprise platform works, so for us, we bring about 25 different entities onto the platform. We just talked about some of those. But what they're doing is they're constantly cross-validating each other's information. So now you've got a much more trusted platform, because if your supplier tells you he started production, but we know that the raw materials haven't been shipped yet, we know we've got a problem. Or the inspection company says, I haven't done the inline inspection yet. So the opportunity is really to have everybody contributing their piece of information, which means Nobody needs to rekey or retouch anybody's information. But really, it all comes into everybody at the same time. And now you get the opportunity to make sure that you've got good, valid, efficient data. And then you start to apply AI and machine learning on that. So for us, we're constantly looking at how do you cost goods? What's this product really going to cost me every single time I ship it? Well, a lot of things happen every single time you ship it. And so the ability to get all that information in real time and to be able to instantly say, this is now the impact of the cost on that product when it goes to this market today. And here's a snapshot of what it cost me today. You do things like that, like costing or dynamic production scheduling. So we constantly monitor what's happening around the world, assortments that a retailer is bringing in, because very often they're bringing thousands of items in at one time. So by being able to look at everything that's happening and everybody's contributing data, you now start to readjust your production times for your supplier. Okay, slow this up, speed this up, or now we can get those goods, those raw materials faster. So it's constantly looking at what everybody's doing, the actions not just of the retailer and the supplier, but all of the partners involved, looks at what they're doing. And then we take the machine learning, the AI on top of all the data we have, because we have the data from the time I had an idea or it was just inspired through to the time it got delivered. So there's a lot of data to act on. And then that gives you the economies of scale, but the insights into what's really happening in your community.
There's been a lack of visibility, a lack of transparency. It sounds like you really figured out that this was one of the biggest pain points, but also a way to solve it.
Yeah, and it only took 30 years to do. So thank God for the technology. I think that, we've had this vision for so long, this community vision, and everybody working together and contributing the pieces and validating everybody's information. But it's just recently that you've got the technology to be able to do things like that and to really delve into the value that's being delivered. So we always look and say, who's going to win? If something happens, if there's a new strategy, whether it's a retailer or a supplier or any other company, who wins, who loses here? And then how do we drive down the cost for everybody involved in that? And you do that because you've got.
And one last question, Sue, around this is, what new tech, like as you look at the ecosystem, what technologies are still wanting, right? Where is their opportunity to kind of improve this ecosystem, this kind of virtual supply chain?
It's everywhere, right? There's not just one. It's some that are surprising, like purchase order systems. Everybody's got a purchase order system, but over 52% of the purchase order systems in retail will be replaced over the next 18 to 24 months. So there's a lot of capability in there that the older legacy systems don't have that you need to introduce. Things like being able to split shipments to multiple countries, multiple markets, understand the costing on one order. There's all sorts of opportunities, virtual showrooms. So but that's probably one of the biggest things right now that our customers are asking. They can't travel, but they need to see product. Not only do they need to see product, they need to see a lot more than they ever saw before. Some of our customers are demanding, they want to see 300% more product. Well, you can only do that in a virtual world and really start to drive down your costs and take advantage of the new way of communicating.
Whitney, you've been living in this virtual world for quite some time. How have you seen, retailers and brands, I'd say in some ways catch up to your way of thinking about this virtualization?
That's a great question. I'm not sure they're quite there yet. We're pretty far ahead. I think just to add on to what Sue just said, I think one of the things that I've seen the biggest change certainly within the last decade, but even over the last couple of years, is as you have, entries with disruptive technologies, I think what's one of the things that I've seen that's been difficult for retailers is how do you put them all together? And this goes back to that idea around collaboration, right? And open API systems. What 3D Look does is one piece of this entire, future digital supply chain. What Sue is doing is another piece. And there's so many different folks working on different areas. It would take for us to do what 3D Look does, plus what Sue does, plus what folks that are doing, say, in 3D pattern software, creating virtual garments. For one company to do all of that, they would need to be well funded beyond, I think, what any of us are probably capable of raising. But where I do see, and where we're spending a lot of time, and certainly we're doing even more so pre-COVID, it was around partnership opportunities. And how do you put what we're doing, say, together with what Sue is doing with some of the virtual design companies? And I think that we will see a lot more of that over the next couple of years. I would say since COVID, certainly 3D has been accelerated. We had a ton of inbound on what is this idea around what does this garment look like on me? We very much at 3D Look believe that this is the future, this idea of try me on, put me in a digital place. I think that over the next 5 years, even without COVID, I believed this, that you were going to see this intersection between fashion and entertainment and gaming, and all of that will be accelerated. But there's still some macro hurdles that have to happen there. Consumer adoption, much higher levels on AR and VR and XR, and perhaps with the release of whatever the next virtual glasses might look like over the next couple of years, we'll see more consumer adoption on that side. I think when we get to that point over the next 3 to 10 years, you're going to see, perhaps the biggest disruption that the fashion industry has ever seen, even without the pandemic. And that's this idea of, creating just unbelievable consumer experiences using 3D. And so, what we do at our core technology is generate a unique 3D model of every consumer that scans themselves. And so our, goal has always been eventually to kind of flip the business model that we've got now and really empower consumers to have their own digital passport. And within that is our measurements, their 3D model, avatar. They can use it in gaming, use it in fashion, find a better size, direct to factory opportunity, which you and I have spoken about in the past, Deborah, health, fitness, all of these opportunities. So it's really about, for us, how do you kind of empower the end consumer? So 3D is even without COVID, 3D was going to be a big part of our world over the next decade. And I think it's an acceleration for sure. I don't see it at scale in 2020. I think the back half of 21 and into 22 and 23 for sure. And I think it's going to be a very, very exciting time.
Lenny, I just have to say it because I think so many of us are thinking about it. Depending on how long this crisis lasts, maybe our avatars will go hang out with each other because, right, we are starting to see some of that, right, from some of the very large technology platforms thinking about different ways of interacting, not only with a product we might buy, but even with each other. And it could be in a game, but it could be theoretically in other places as well. So it's really interesting technology.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, we think about the future of how we interact on top of spatial computing platforms. So if you think about business models that didn't exist 10 years ago before iOS and what was built, that was really the biggest disruptor to retail. It was, there were lots of things that, created closing of stores over the last 5 to 10 years, and certainly over the last 5 years, COVID's accelerating that. But these companies, I think, we're going to go out of business anyway. So, what we're very excited about is how do we enable what we as consumers are going to be able to do with our avatars over the next, 0 to 10 years.
And kind of building on that, JoAnn, you work with many companies who have legacy systems, and Yonder has made many acquisitions, probably too many to even name, in terms of, really developing this idea of dynamic commerce. Can you walk us through the thought process and where you see, kind of Yonder going and working with these companies who do have these legacy systems?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that you see with the growth of e-commerce, the need to connect many of these platforms, whether it be the e-commerce platform and to the store platform, and really see the end-to-end, which we've seen in supply chain for a long time. It's not just manufacturer to store, it's manufacturer to distribution center, micro fulfillment center to customer. So last week, for instance, Blue Yonder announced our acquisition of Yontrix, and we're really excited about this acquisition. And the acquisition really is, for those of you who don't know, Yontrix is a SaaS provider of commerce and fulfillment microservices. And what this allows us to do is further extend and take and really combine real-time transactional data all the way through to the planning and fulfillment, which is so important, which is allowing us to now, for customers, be able to combine that interaction all the way back to the beginning of the customer journey and sales process versus at the time of order. So you're seeing supply chains extend all the way back to influence the buy, not just to execute the buy, which is kind of exciting. And I think that that's the trend that we're starting to see, and why Yontrix is such an important part of our suite that we're adding to our Illuminate suite.
Well, JoAnn, you bring up this idea almost truly of sustainability. Anurag, as we think about kind of some of the waste we see in the grocery industry, authentication, the luxury market, how do you see kind of the future of sustainability and the future of some of these technologies as well?
So, obviously blockchain is one area where people talk about it a lot. Going back to even the fulfillment center, for example, Shopify is working very hard. They're going to invest about $2 billion into improving their supply chain system and the fulfillment network. And part of what they want to do is, encourage their merchants to use sustainable, packaging. It gives them their own signature. It allows them to do things that, normally they won't be able to do it with a third-party fulfillment network. I would also like to echo some of the, comments I heard about SaaS software as well as changing of order entry systems. We expect a massive spike in improvement in or sales of new ERP systems next year that tie not just into supply chain, order management, back office functions, because they have been very, very old. In fact, ERP is one of the most, I would say, primitive area to be modernized within all software packages. We have sales, we have human resources. Commerce is going fast, but everything on the supply chain world is fairly old and on-premise based. So SaaS-based applications will kick it up a lot. And then finally, you talked about authentication. We think blockchain is going to make a big difference. In principle, both blockchain use in the grocery store as well as in authentication of products have been around for some time, or been talked around for some time. But we think, as we move into the next era of retail, I think these things will kick off, because people would want to make sure that they're buying, sustainable products, as well as, something that's very authenticated. Even if they're buying it online from a, reputed vendor, they want to make sure they're getting the right thing. In fact, it's pretty funny. I was at a Bloomingdale's once, and they requested me to buy it, these products rather in the store, rather than ordering it on somebody else's website, because they were very certain that the samples sometimes they see, coming back are not authentic pieces.
So if we think about this idea of authenticity and sustainability, how does that, kind of work in a multi-enterprise platform? And, with this idea of true transparency, I would have to assume that things are changing at a very fast pace for you.
They definitely are. It's really interesting because some of the retailers we're working with are really identifying new revenue opportunities relative to their strength in being able to offer a sustainable product and that's fully compliant. So we're working with companies like Treadler, which was H&M, and I think Treadler just recently announced what they're doing there is they're really monetizing their supply chain assets and strengths. So they're offering those supply chain assets and strengths to non-owned retailers. So so they look and say, gee, we've got a great reputation for sustainability and being fully compliant and the whole social responsibility. And we do a really great job in Bangladesh. And ultimately, we control maybe 60 or 70% of knit products that are done there. So why not go out and offer that capability to non-owned retailers? So we are starting to see that retailers are looking at other opportunities relative to their ability to deliver a sustainable, compliant, socially responsible product. And we think that trend, certainly we did it first with Treadler, but we have probably about 4 or 5 other major retailers that we're working with right now that want to jump on that trend to offer their types of services because they have such great.
Do you think, Sue, that as we see these kind of virtual buying trips and perhaps more people in the organization have their eye on product before it's ordered, do you think that changes kind of excess product in the supply chain? How do you think that changes just this notion of excess, and does sustainability then start to just almost naturally seep into everything we're doing in supply chain?
Yeah, I definitely think it does. It's been interesting because probably one of the most disrupted supply chains right now is grocery. And we tend to think of, grocery is doing so well because they're selling out. But grocery has adopted much more of a just-in-time type of supply chain for visibility. When everybody's buying all of your toilet paper or all of your paper goods, then you've wiped out your for weeks, if not months. And that's the issue that we see that they're encountering right now. And so they're trying to adopt this just-in-time type of environment to a pandemic type of buying situation. So in order to do that, you need to have incredible visibility into your supply chain, into how all of your suppliers behave, but not just your suppliers, their suppliers. We go all the way in grocery down to the farmer level. So you're really looking at making sure that you've got all the right information, that the product isn't going to be recalled, it's safe, it's sustainable, and it's market ready. So I think that whole idea of supply chain visibility is going to be much more to the front of everybody's thinking.
One question, Sue, I really want to ask you is if you then have this transparency, and there's been so many conversations I've been in about if we think we're getting organic cotton, are we really getting kind of the actual product? How do we write this authentication, this not only the comfort from the supplier, but also from the retailer and then ultimately the consumer? How is that transparency changing?
So that's where we're really looking very, very closely exactly who does what and when. So one of the things we came up with, because consumers are very concerned about what is the life cycle of this product. And so we have tags that you can put on that says, hey, this was inspired by this, and this designer designed it, and this is where the raw materials were sourced and produced, and this is who sewed it, and here's who inspected it. We've got that because all that information is on the platform. But the comfort it brings to people is that they now know for each piece in that product who did what. And because everybody's contributing their piece and cross-validating each other's information, similar to a blockchain, it becomes much more trusted. And so we see that as increasingly important in making people comfortable and making them realize that, yes, I know not just who I bought it from, but who they bought it from, who serviced it, who delivered it, who inspected. And I think that will become increasingly important for the consumers to understand that level of detail for comfort.
Anurag, Sue brought up this idea of blockchain. One area that we've always heard a lot of interest from the supply chain itself and from retailers and even consumers is this idea that if I know who made my garment, is there a way for me to tip them, to send them a note, to start to build a relationship with them, just so we truly start to make a difference in people's lives, not only financially, but also, if you will, from an emotional perspective, and we're really able to truly thank people, especially in areas where a little bit can go a long way. What are you seeing there, or is that still very much in the future?
I think it's part of the greater connectivity discussion that was happening before. We also heard from our earlier panelists that the Gen Z and the millennials have completely different buying patterns than a lot of us. And one of the areas that we have heard a lot is they are very conscious about where the product is coming from, who's making them. Is it socially? Is it, are you making sure that it's in a place where nobody's exploited? So I think blockchain will really go through in helping a lot of that stuff, whether it's in the coffee industry, whether it's in the garments, or pretty much almost everywhere, to make sure that the manufacturer is doing everything ethical, and that really helps to basically validate. And you really cannot do that without a blockchain technology, frankly, in our view. And I think that's where we expect acceleration in adoption of new blockchain implementations across the entire retail landscape.
That's incredibly interesting. And Whitney, you've talked a lot about this idea of the move towards personalization, but can we do it at scale, right? Can we produce just one unit? Where are we in that? And how do you see that evolving in the next, let's call it 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We've seen, even before COVID, over the last couple of years, we've seen organic inbound growth from brands who are digital first and who have a business model that is really based on customized clothing. And it costs a little bit more, and the consumer has to wait a little bit longer for it. But going back to some of what was said a little bit earlier about Gen Z, we're definitely seeing this kind of underground growth in this area of these brands that are really building products that are, one-offs, and they're based on, who the end consumer is. And if you think about one of the biggest shifts that's happened over the last 10 years is that the consumer is really driving retail right now, rather than us on kind of the product development side saying, we're going to deliver, yellow in June and transition to olive in August and deliver red for Christmas in October. That whole shift has changed. And with that needs to come a supply chain that is much more agile. And so it's not an overnight process. It's a super, super complex industry, and making a t-shirt for people who have never done it, it's really hard and complex, and there are a lot of people that touch it. So as different pieces of the supply chain begin to automate, I think we can get there. I don't think it's something we're going to see overnight, but there are a lot of folks, and even here in the US, some factories that we're working with that are really rethinking what does automated manufacturing look like. I mean, if you think about it, it's a lot easier to automate a towel, for example, or a basic t-shirt at mass than it is to automate a, blouse that might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 components to it. So it still has a ways to go on that piece, but there are a lot of parts of that digital supply chain that, people like 3D Look at on the front end are working on. I think the other thing that's really significant to think about, and this is something that we have certainly seen from younger millennials and Gen Zs, is this whole idea around sustainability and waste, right? So in order to be a sustainable company, it's not just about recycling plastic bottles. It's about what do your return rates look like and what kind of inventories are you carrying? So you can't be a sustainable company with inflated inventories and high return rates. And so one way, and we know return rates are a significant part of it. I think almost 70% are related to fit and sizing issues. And so how do you take this idea of the way we used to shop, which was go into the store and try on 3 or 4 of a size in the dressing room and buy the one that not only maybe fits us, but how we think it fits us? Because how I think something might fit you, Deborah, you may be like, I don't like the way that fits. I like it tighter or looser or what have you. So it's not a black and white. I always tell our engineering group, what we're doing is in black and white. 1+1 doesn't always equal 2 in fashion because there's such an emotional component to that. But for a younger generation, and particularly with COVID, and this is a little bit more philosophical, but this idea of getting back to less of better and a life that feels more impactful and purposeful. And I think as Gen Z comes into working power and buying power, that we're going to see more and more of a demand for this. And we're already seeing it in food, and we're already seeing it in beauty. And we have been, for over 5 years. So the next natural piece of it is apparel. And we're certainly seeing that on our side as brands come to us that are really, they care about what the consumer looks like, because you can't make custom clothing unless you have the measurements of the consumer. It really is that simple.
You bring up something that's really interesting, Whitney, is we were very honored to be part of Congresswoman Maloney's Made in America Act, and kind of helping her think through kind of what it should look like and the percentage of made in America PPE and the stockpiles and credits being given back to those who are making product. But the foundation was really about made in America. Can you touched on that? Can you elaborate a bit more in terms of what you're seeing from that perspective and where do you think it's going?
Yeah. I hope it's coming back. When I started in this industry almost 30 years ago, I worked for big companies and we made everything in the US. And then I watched it go offshore and have spent many, many decades overseas. I definitely see it coming back. We're working with small factories in all over the US, Brooklyn, New Jersey, middle of the country. Does it come back at mass scale? Part of that is around brands and retailers rethinking their business models. And I think it was Sue maybe that touched on this a little bit earlier. But if you're running a cost card the way you ran a cost card 20 years ago, you're never going to get to an on-demand model because the numbers just won't compute. I do think, particularly for brands that have a business model which equate to charging a little bit more and having the consumer wait a little bit more. And this goes back to the transparency in the products that are being made, where the fabrics are coming from, where the materials are coming from, that whole traceability factor. I think we will see much, much more of that over the next 5 to 10 years. Anurag touched on this a little bit, but I 100% agree with that. I believe that, this maybe isn't a 3 or 4 year horizon, but I do think in a decade that, look, this whole idea of going onto a website and having to search through millions of products to figure out the one that is going to fit you, in this day and age, it makes no sense, right? It makes no sense. And e-commerce more or less looks like it did 20 years ago. So I think we're going to see a real shift in how we engage online with e-commerce companies. And I think that brands that are really rethinking that experience in a completely different way are going to be the ones that really drive commerce over the next 10 years. But I do believe that we will get to a model where you'll be able to put your avatar out there and you will have 3D designers that will be bidding for your business with their 3D clothes, which you will be able to try on your avatar. And you will then be able to take it a step further because you'll have so much traceability built into this with blockchain and other emerging technologies that you will be able to choose where you want those goods produced. Do you want to produce them on a farm in Africa? Do you want to produce them, here back at home in the US? And I think that will create this consumer to factory model eventually, which will be even more disruptive to retail than it already is. And I think we will get there.
So, JoAnn, what do you think about this idea of a consumer to factory model? How do you see, supply chains changing in ways that maybe many of us haven't sat around the table and had conversations about?
I agree with it. I definitely think that we're heading for a more personalized experience. I think that's probably final state versus where we're starting. I would say at this point in time, what I see happening is more of a decentralized model to get the products closer to customers with the growth that we're seeing in e-commerce. So when you see micro fulfillment, both in grocery to be able to fulfill those online orders, or you see it within regionalized DCs for soft lines and hard lines retailers to get speed to market, I think that's the first step and the focus of where many of the supply chains are morphing right now. And where we see retailers, and I'm having all my discussions about, is really how do I shore up and make sure that my supply chains are resilient. I think personalization, taking it to that extra step, is coming. We're seeing that merging between manufacturing and retailers. We see it in CPG where they're going direct to consumers. So we're starting to see some of this, whether it be through subscriptions or whether it be through CPG direct to consumers. And we'll continue to see it morph towards that. But I think probably the scalable model at this point is more regionalized and decentralized distribution to be able to drive to e-commerce zip code kind of pockets of customers to be able to get that speed to market to them is where I see it evolving probably first.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to close it out with a lightning round. And if all of you can, just spend 30 seconds on, what you think is, most likely, it can be outrageous to happen in 21. JoAnn, why don't we start with you?
I think retail is going to rebound exponentially in 2021. And I think we're going to see some positive trends. People didn't stop buying clothes. We're just figuring out what the new normal is going to be and what type of clothes and how they want to interact. So I think we will see a strong boomerang back to the soft lines industry in the time frame of 2021. And I think that retailers are going to really embrace advanced technologies. They have to for scale. So we're going to see significant advances. And I think we're going to see some cool tech being leveraged by retailers to be able to engage with customers again.
Okay, Anurag?
So, I would echo some of the thoughts that even though total retail spending may not go up, fair amount next year, but we think there's going to be a massive redistribution of spending within the set of retailers that we have. And those that are aggressively investing in, all the emerging technologies that we talked about, should eventually gain far more market share or wallet share of the consumer than they currently have. So it's not going to be just Amazon. There's going to be a lot of other vendors that, our panelists have mentioned. Poonam, for example, mentioned Nike, and there were so many other companies that are investing very heavily right now. We think those are the ones that are going to reap the benefits of it. It's going to be a lot of products going into the cloud in terms of software that binds the entire front office and the back office and the middle office. And we do see great potential for areas such as blockchain and 3D printing and 3D modeling.
Great, Whitney?
So I'm going to be really optimistic here. If we do get a vaccine at scale sometime in 2021, I think that the resurrection of the restaurant is going to drive all of us back to our closets and shopping, and we're all going to put on dresses and high heels again for the first time in a long time. So I would like to place a bet on the back half of 2021 that we go back to shopping more for just, the next pair of the softest pajama bottoms we can find that are below our waist on our Zoom calls. And that, restaurant resurrection helps drive us back outside and back to dressing up again.
Great. And Sue?
So I'm going to agree with Whitney on the dresses, but not the high heels. I'm not ever going back to those again. But I think that what's going to happen is the way retailers buy is going to change dramatically. So the whole idea of buying virtually, where before they always said, I've got to go overseas, I've got to do my buying trip, I've got to travel. That now they have found a new way to buy, and that's virtual. And I think that we'll see a lot more retailers buying more virtually and dealing virtually. I think the idea of near sourcing, we talked about, are we going to bring production back to the U.S.? We're working with our clients today who and many of them are doing near sourcing. Now, originally they started as a way to test product, and then they started to see that they could really be successful with some of these factories and they could expand. And I think that we will see some production moving back to the US, and this whole idea of experimenting with the near sourcing could be a greater source of their products as opposed to always going overseas.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your insights. JoAnn, Sue, Whitney, Anurag, this is an amazing discussion and exceeded all expectations. Very interesting to hear about, kind of the future of the retail supply chain and how all these innovations are going to make companies more agile. I want to also thank you, the audience, for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to Poonam for some closing remarks.
Great. Thanks, Deborah. It's truly been an honor to co-host today's event with you and to hear all the insights and perspectives from the accomplished panelists on supply chain, retail, real estate, and the future of retail. I know I learned a lot. I hope all of you did too. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope to see all of you at another. Stay safe and be home.